Hey everyone, we're about to dig into a fascinating corner of cognitive science that's going to challenge one of our deepest beliefs about working together. We're talking about collaborative memory. And trust me, the way our brains interact when we try to remember things as a group is, well, it's not what you think.
You've heard it a million times, right? Two heads are better than one. When you're stuck, studying for a big test, or just trying to remember what happened last weekend, the instinct is to team up. But is that actually the best thing for your memory?
And you know what? This belief feels right. It just makes intuitive sense. In surveys, pretty much everyone, young and old, says they feel like their memory gets a boost when they work with other people. We just assume that when we collaborate, we'll trigger each other's memories. You say something, it jogs my memory, and boom, we piece it all together. It feels like a win-win.
But what if I told you that the science shows the exact opposite? What if the very act of trying to remember something together actually makes a group perform worse than the sum of its parts? Yeah, that's the bizarre puzzle that's been at the center of memory research for decades. So get ready to have your mind blown a little bit.
Okay, so let's get into this. This is what psychologists call the collaboration paradox. It's this super strange phenomenon where a group of people, all working together to recall information, consistently remembers less than what they could have if they had just worked alone.
So how do they even test this? Well, researchers have a pretty clever setup. They get a bunch of people to study the same list of words or pictures. Then they split them up. One set becomes a collaborative group. They get in a room together and, out loud, try to recall everything they can. The other set is the nominal group. Now, this is the key part. They're a group in name only. Each person works alone to recall the list. Then, the researchers take all their individual answers, put them together, and just get rid of the duplicates. That final score for the nominal group? That represents the group's absolute maximum memory potential.
So, what happens when you compare the two? The results are, honestly, they're shocking, and they're incredibly consistent. In a typical study, the nominal groups, the ones showing the group's potential, they might recall, say, 68 to 70% of the stuff. But the collaborative groups, the ones actually working together, they only get about 54 to 56%. That is a huge drop. That's a memory deficit of around 14%, just from the act of collaborating.
This effect is so real and so reliable, it's got its own name, collaborative inhibition. And it shows up everywhere with all kinds of material, word lists, pictures, stories, even really emotional events. It doesn't matter if you're working with strangers, your best friend, or your spouse. It happens with kids, it happens with older adults. Now, to be clear, the interacting group does recall more than any single person would alone, but it consistently reliably recalls less than its total potential.
So why? What is going on? Is it just that people get lazy in a group? Nope, it's not that. The main culprit is a brain mechanism called retrieval disruption. See, when we study information, each of us organize it in our own unique, kind of weird way. We build these personal mental pathways to get back to that information later. But when you're in a group and you hear someone else recalling things in their order, it completely interrupts your pathway. It throws you off your mental train of thought.
And this is the perfect way to picture it. Imagine you get 3 expert packers to try and pack one suitcase together at the same time. One person rolls their shirts, another uses packing cubes, a third folds everything perfectly flat. They'd just be bumping into each other, undoing each other's work, completely breaking their flow. The result? A messy, inefficiently packed bag. They would have packed way more if they'd just done their own bags and then put them all together. That chaos is exactly what's happening to our retrieval strategies during group recall.
Okay, so if collaboration is so costly for a group's immediate performance, why on earth do we do it? And why does it feel like it's helping? Well, the answer is in the powerful, hidden benefits that don't actually show up in that initial group score.
So while the group's collective recall is taking a hit in the moment, the individuals inside that group are actually learning. First, you've got re-exposure gains. When a teammate says something you had forgotten, it's like a mini study session. That memory gets stronger in your own mind for later. Second, and this is critical, is error pruning. In a good group, people can say, wait, I don't think that's right, or are you sure about that? This process filters out mistakes, which means the final product is often more accurate, even if it's a little less complete.
But this brings us to a darker side of collaborative memory. What happens when the errors aren't pruned? What happens when a mistake isn't just made, but it's actually passed from one person to another, literally infecting their memory? This is where things get really fascinating and, honestly, a little bit scary.
The term for this is social contagion of memory, and it is the perfect description. It's when a false memory, an error, is transmitted from one person to another during a conversation. The person who receives it then weaves that error into their own memory of the event, and they start to believe they actually remember it themselves. It's exactly how misinformation spreads and becomes part of someone's personal truth.
So what determines whether a group prunes errors or spreads them like a virus? A huge factor is the style of collaboration. Researchers have compared two main types. One is turn-taking, a very rigid method, where each person has to contribute one item in a sequence. The other is a conversational free-for-all, where people can just talk, debate, and build on each other's ideas freely.
And the difference is like night and day. That turn-taking style is a breeding ground for false memories. The social pressure to just say something when it's your turn makes people guess, and since there's no room for discussion, those guesses often get accepted as fact. The free-for-all style, on the other hand, is a fantastic error correction machine. That back and forth allows for that critical error pruning. People can challenge each other, express doubt, and figure out what's actually accurate. A free-flowing conversation basically acts like an immune system against false memories.
Now, these dynamics don't just stay within a small group. False memories, once they're created, can spread through entire social networks, distorting our whole shared understanding of the past.
To study this, researchers use an experiment that's basically a scientific version of the game of telephone. It's called a serial reproduction chain. Person A studies a story, then recalls it for person B. Person B then has to recall what they heard from A for person C, and so on down the line. And at each step, the story gets a little bit further from the original.
And it's not just that people forget things. As this quote points out, the story doesn't just get shorter, it gets more distorted. The proportion of false information relative to the accurate information actually grows with each retelling. The signal gets weaker and the noise gets louder and louder.
And this explains so much about our world, right? It's the engine behind the spread of rumors and misinformation. It's at the heart of strange things like the Mandela effect, where huge groups of people share the exact same false memory, like remembering Nelson Mandela dying in prison back in the 80s. These aren't just individual mistakes. They're socially transmitted distortions that have become a shared, yet totally false, reality.
And get this, it turns out the problem isn't just with remembering together, it can start when we learn together. This chart shows something called the collaborative encoding deficit. Encoding is just the sciencey term for learning something new, for forming a memory. Now, if you look at the bars on the left, you see the performance of people who studied alone. Compare that to the bars on the right, which show people who studied as a pair. They consistently remembered less. And this happened even when they were tested with the exact same partner they studied with. It suggests that the personal, internal process of making your own unique mental connections to information is just more powerful than trying to do it as a group.
So after all this, is collaboration just a lost cause for memory? Not at all. It's just way more complex than we thought. The key is understanding when to use it and how to manage it. Let's pull all these threads together for the final takeaway.
Here it is, side by side. On one hand, you have the very real costs. Collaborative inhibition hurts the group's immediate output because of that retrieval disruption, and if you're not careful, it can lead to the social contagion of false memories. But on the other hand, you have these powerful benefits for the individuals. Re-exposure to forgotten info strengthens their own memories for later, and that error pruning makes the group's final output much more accurate.
And that brings us to the single most important point of this entire explainer. Collaboration is a double-edged sword. To get the benefits while avoiding the costs, you have to pay attention to the style of the interaction. Encourage free-flowing conversation, discussion, even respectful disagreement. That is what enables that critical error pruning and protects the group from social contagion.
And this leaves us with a massive question for our modern world. Social media is basically one giant, uncontrolled collaborative memory group, and it often operates more like that rigid, turn-taking chain than a healthy, free-for-all discussion. So given everything we've just seen about retrieval disruption and social contagion, how do we build the digital version of error pruning to protect our shared collective memory from being permanently distorted? It's a huge challenge to think about, and one that affects every single one of us. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.